The Cambodian Genocide is etched into history as one of the most unimaginable human sufferings of the 20th century. From 1975 to 1979, the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot's radical and paranoid beliefs, turned Cambodia into a place of terror where 1.5 to 2 million people, a quarter of the population, died. The roots of these events that led to this catastrophic period can be traced back to the troubled Cambodian political scene in the 1960s and early 1970s. Cambodia, under King Norodom Sihanouk, had swung precariously in the balance of neutrality between the two rivals in the Cold War. Despite Sihanouk's careful attempts to balance relations with both communist and non-communist powers, the pressure increased as the Vietnam War raged on their eastern border. The North Vietnamese used Cambodian territory for the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which in turn provoked covert U.S. bombing campaigns that between 1969 and 1973 decimated rural areas and displaced thousands. Designed to destroy Viet Cong bases, the bombings killed up to 150,000 Cambodian civilians and continued to further destabilize an already fragile nation. In 1970, Sihanouk's regime was overthrown in a rightist coup led by General Lon Nol. The new Lon Nol government, bolstered by staunchly anti-communist allies that included the United States, declared the Khmer Republic before aligning itself against the North Vietnamese and their communist allies. The new government was rotten with corruption and incompetence, for which many Cambodians turned against them. At the same time, in the northeastern jungles, a nascent power in the form of an insurgent group called the Khmer Rouge was developing strength. The Khmer Rouge, led by Saloth Sar, known as Pol Pot, combined Marxist-Leninist ideas with a version of agrarian socialism that was highly nationalistic. In addition, the regime received further aid from Maoist China, both in economic and military fields, for the creation of their ideological molding. It was on April 17, 1975, that Phnom Penh fell to Khmer Rouge forces. The capture marked the realization of his ambitions and the end of the Cambodian Civil War. The fall of the city was a turning point. 2 million residents in the capital were forcibly made to leave the city en masse to the countryside. Thus said the Khmer Rouge, a temporary evacuation to save the citizens from some supposed U.S. bombing. But in truth, it was a prelude to a ruthless social re-engineering project. The families were torn apart, and even the patients in hospitals were dragged out of their beds and thrust out into the exodus. On the long journey, thousands died of exhaustion, starvation, and illness. Under Pol Pot, Democratic Kampuchea became the country's new name. Their vision was a classless farming society, free of Western influence and modernity, an unrealistic dream for the future. It suppressed currency, private property, and religion. The educated elite formed one of the main targets. This extreme modernization was to be achieved by emptying the cities, dispersing the population into labor camps, and forcing them to perform exhausting work in often impossible conditions in rice fields. The lack of basic medical care and severe food shortages caused countless deaths from hunger and disease. To keep you is no benefit. To destroy you is no loss, sounded the regime's mantra, embodying the callous disregard for the meaning of human life. The Khmer Rouge regime was marked by widespread violence and mass killings. The government developed a network of prisons. The most notorious is Tuol Sleng, or S21, a former high school turned into a torture center facility in Phnom Penh. Almost 20,000 people were put in prison at S21 and subjected to the most intense modes of interrogation, including beating, electric shock, and waterboarding. Confessions obtained through torture often led to execution at the killing fields, a name now associated with mass murder. Basic tools such as pickaxes were used to kill prisoners, since the government wanted to save ammunition, and bodies were dumped into mass graves. It included targets from perceived state enemies to ethnic minorities. The most severe persecution fell upon the Cham Muslims, whose villages were razed and religious practice forbidden. The regime's effort to extinguish cultural differences saw the Cham taken en masse for execution, forced upon pain of death to renounce their faith. The Chinese Cambodian community fared similarly, suspected sympathizers of capitalism. The Khmer Rouge aimed to create an ethnically pure society in the most brutal way. This internal terror reflected the larger atrocities of the regime, showing how deeply Pol Pot relied on fear to stay in power. For a communist state, Vietnam itself did not immediately intervene, even when provocations included cross-border raids into its territory by the Khmer Rouge. But as the attacks continued, killing even more Vietnamese civilians, that situation reached a tipping point. In December of 1978, Vietnam invaded full-scale into Cambodia. On January 7, 1979, the capital, Phnom Penh, fell to the Vietnamese army, displacing the Khmer Rouge government, thus ending a 4-year rule of terror in Cambodia. With that, Pol Pot and what remained of his forces fled back into the western jungles and continued low-level insurgency for years. The impacts of the Cambodian Genocide run deep. By 1979, an estimated 1.5 to 2 million were dead because of execution, starvation, and disease, a loss representing nearly 25% of the pre-genocide population. This brought immense suffering and left lasting psychological and social scars still felt today. Survivors spoke of widespread brutality, atrocities committed during forced labor, torture testifies, and separation of families. Mass graves mapped across the country by the Documentation Center of Cambodia bear witness to the scale of the tragedy. The remnants of S-21, the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum, are a grim reminder of the atrocities. Due to Cold War politics, where global powers wanted to limit Vietnam's influence in Southeast Asia, the UN allowed the Khmer Rouge to keep a seat well into the 1990s. In fact, it wasn't until 2003 that the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia were included with the United Nations for prosecuting senior Khmer Rouge leaders. By 2009, trials began. Those including Nguyen Chea and Khayu Samphan were convicted and sentenced for crimes against humanity. Although limited in scope, this effort provided some accountability and recognition of the suffering of millions. The accountability for justice could not be met in the case of Pol Pot himself, who died under vague circumstances in 1998 while under house arrest by his own former associates. The trials make the resilience of the Cambodian people stand out as they have been striving to rebuild and reconcile into the past marred with violence and loss. The story of Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge is a lesson in radical ideology and the dangers of unchecked power, a vivid reminder that a regime, impelled by an unrelenting pursuit of some kind of idealistic vision, degenerates into atrocity. Cambodia today still carries the weight of this history in its memorials, survivors' memories, and ongoing efforts to educate future generations. Thank you for watching and learning about this pivotal part of history. If you found this video informative, consider subscribing for more deep dives into world events and their legacies. Leave your thoughts or any questions you have in the comment section below. Like, comment, and share to spread awareness.